Hello, so I'm live and hopefully everybody can see and hear me. I'll just check to see what YouTube is showing. Okay. Okay, good. So, checked on YouTube, it seems to be all right. So, hello everybody and welcome to another anti-relativity session. This time, it's going to highlight an issue where there was a talk given in India Science Congress that Einstein's relativity is wrong, and that led to the decision of them wanting to censor future science talks to stop it happening again. So there's just numerous barriers set up against people who want to believe Einstein's wrong and to try to get that message out to the public. So next slide. This is one of the news reports. If I just enlarge it for myself to read it, it says, this is on the Indian Express, meet the scientists, Albert Einstein is wrong, Van had 24 aircraft, and it says at the Indian Science Congress, Cannon dismissed the work of Albert Einstein, Isaac Newton and Stephen Hawking and claimed that this century would belong to him. So, escape, right. So I've got the video of the science talk, so if I can just try to call that up now at this stage. So this is the science talk that Cannon gave. Unfortunately, you can't see the slides, and that makes it rather disappointing and difficult to follow. So I'm only going to show the first part of it. And this video starts with introduction to the Indian Science Congress and an opening ceremony. And so I'm going to jump to the bit where Cannon is introduced. So where's that? Play.
Krishnan. Dr. Cannon is a senior scientist and coordinator university education at the World Community Service Centre. He received his Masters of Technology from Swinburne University, Melbourne, and Masters of Business Administration from Victoria University. He is a Doctor of Philosophy in Renewable Energy Resources in Victoria University. And you all will be interested to know that in his research work, he has refined Newton's theory of gravity and Einstein's theory of special relativity. He has published about 30 publications in peer-reviewed journals and delivered lectures during international conferences and guest lectures at about 55 institutions at Australia and abroad. Today, Dr. Cannon will be sharing his thoughts on the topic dark matter and dark energy refines Newton's theory of gravity, Einstein's theory of gravity, and Higgs boson. So it's my absolute honor to call upon the stage Dr. Cannon Jigathala Krishnan. Welcome him with a very big round of applause, everyone.
My salutations to my master Vedatri, my supervisor Satyamurthy Mahalingaya, and I know that you would have known our Union Science Minister, respected Honorable Harshvardhan sir. And next, if you see like our Vice Chancellor, Pro Chancellor Rashmi Mittal, and I want this management. I was interacting since 2-3 months, and I was trying to see what personality they are when you're given at a higher level. So Rashmi Mittal told she want to come to
So as you can see, the slide behind Dr. Cannon is difficult to read, and unfortunately the slides get more difficult as the time goes on. So first of all, he's doing all his introductions, and he then starts talking about Newton's gravity, and he starts saying that Newton is wrong, and then he gets on to saying that Einstein is wrong as well. And so it's the Einstein wrong bit I'm going to jump to. 15.
Wherever I apply more force, the ball has to go to the direction. But what happens to the Earth? Because the space is compressing the Earth equally in all direction, 360-degree in angle. Okay? If the force is more, it will go to one direction. So what happens? It is moving in the same path, elliptical path, without changing the polarity. So now tell me, it is pushed on all directions or it has been pulled from the center? It is pushed from all directions. This is known as the quality of the space. The quality of the space is self-compressive surrounding pressure force. It is compressing itself. For example, if you take a wet cloth and if you squeeze it, what will happen? All the water droplets will come out. This is the quality. This Newton didn't understand. This Einstein didn't understand. Einstein made a big blunder, even though he's a genius. I'm telling, he made a big blunder. He was guiding the world in a very, very wrong way. And if you see today, I have completely refined all the theories of Einstein, and I will explain one by one. Now you know very exactly what is Newton's theory, and now let us see what is Einstein told. What happens, what made Einstein to think about gravity was, if Newton's gravity is true, in an instantaneous time, if the sun collapses or sun dies, the earth will move immediately. The earth will move immediately in a different direction because
Hi. That's like, so he's saying Einstein is wrong, he's saying Newton is wrong, and unfortunately when he goes into his explanations, he's going to start using slides, and you can't really read the slides, and I find that too distracting that you can't follow it along in the slides. So I'm leaving that video there, and if you want to personally look into that video, you can. So this is so that's where this article from the Indian Express is dealing with Cannon pointing out, he's saying that Einstein, Newton and Hawking are wrong. Next. It gets reported differently in the news media, emphasizing different things that were being said. Cannon is not the only one giving a talk at the Indian Science Congress. There's other people giving talks, and what Cannon says gets mixed in with what other people are saying. The article says Cannon, who dismissed the work of Einstein, Newton and Stephen Hawking at the 106th Indian Science Congress, told the Indian Express Sunday that just as the 20th century belonged to Einstein, this one would belong to him. I'm a better physicist than any of them because my research will answer all the questions about physics, he said. So it sounds a bit egotistical. When somebody says Einstein is wrong, it sounds like you are a bit egotistical, unfortunately. And so that's one of the ways that the mainstream gets to dismiss people. So this is Dr. Cannon. He's a former director, academic and research, Indian scientist, theoretical physicist and cosmologist. So if this information is correct, he's quite an authority on the subject of physics, particularly that of Einstein and Newton and so forth. So this is what it says, and you can read most of what it says there. He's talking about a new model of physics, which is named as the super standard model, and under the supervision of another professor and so forth. And he says, I've concluded that unified force, which is defined as self-compressive surrounding pressure force, is the dark matter. So far in physics, nobody has been able to explain what dark matter and dark energy is. I have defined and explained dark matter and dark energy, one of the most famous and most embarrassing problems in physics so far. I have refined Newton's theory of gravity. This is what he's saying. Einstein's theory of special relativity equals mc squared. And he's got another equation there. And Einstein's theory of general relativity, and also Higgs boson, which was declared as the God particle by the standard model of physics. So that is roughly what his claims are. So what Dr. Cannon was saying at the Science Congress seems to have got mixed in with what other people were saying at the Congress. So if you're looking at this report is saying Indian Science Congress speakers say Newton is wrong, ancient demon king had planes. So that's that report. And it seems to be that the person who's saying Newton's wrong was Dr. Cannon, and somebody else is talking about ancient demon king having planes. Okay. And it says, at this year's annual meeting of the Indian Science Congress, senior research scientist Cannon dismissed Einstein's theory of relativity as a big blunder and said Newton didn't really understand how gravity works. And so another person, Rao, said that Vavana, a demon god with 10 heads, had 24 kinds of aircraft of varying sizes and capacities. And India was making test tube babies thousands of years ago. Dinosaurs were created by the Hindu god Brahma, said Ashu, a scientist with expertise in paleontology. So Dr. Cannon was saying about Einstein, Newton, and so forth being wrong, and it was these other people like Rao and Ashu were talking about different things, and those other two people seem to be talking about things from what was written in Hindu religious text. So the Indian Science Congress had a sort of mixed bag. You had things being said there which Western mainstream science would dismiss as mythology because it was dealing with what the religious texts were saying in India. And you've got the same sort of problem with the Bible. Western science wants to dismiss that as mythology as well. So you've got this clash between religion and science. Western science doesn't want to accept any sort of religious text. It seems to have a more atheist perspective on things. And unfortunately, Dr. Cannon, who was saying Einstein and so forth are wrong, is getting mixed in with what these other people are saying about religious text. So I'm making note of it, that the Western science establishment dismiss that as mythology, question mark. So, article continues. Not exactly the kind of remarks you would expect at an event whose mission is to advance and further the cause of science, to stimulate discussion on scientific theories, and to create an awareness of science-related issues, especially among children. And that is funded by the Indian government's Ministry of Science and Technology. And those three people I mentioned were addressing a group of 5,000 children assembled from all over the country at the event's Children's Science Congress, and they were posted on YouTube and reported back widely by the press. The Congress organisers were red-faced, and the scientific community in India was outraged. And many citizens tweeted their shock. So, the organisers of the conference were taken aback. This is the 106th edition of the Science Congress, said the group's General Secretary in an interview with NPR. Since 1914, we have had so many meaningful conversations with children on science. We've hosted Nobel laureates from around the world, and yet the controversy overshadows the good when some people misuse our platform for personal and political gain. About 15,000 scientists from India and around the world attend the conference every year, said as Asho, zoologist and former president of the Congress. So invitations were sent to 250 scientists and researchers to speak at the various sessions of the annual event. Among the famous attendees this year were 3 Nobel laureates, and so it says who they are. And addressing the comments made during the children's event, Saxena said, "We've never dreamed that some of them would spout such irrational ideas. They were invited to speak based on their scientific credentials. But this isn't the first time the Indian Science Congress has been mired in controversy. In 2016, another person famously called the event a circus because of the way religious ideologies held sway over science, and said he wouldn't attend another session. And many scientists believe that politics is the problem. So it's tying into the problem with politics. It's supposed to be a right-wing group called the RSS, and wanted to be now mainstream. The RSS believes in propagating Hindutva as a nationalist movement. The term refers to the effort to establish a Hindu way of life and glorifying Hindu beliefs. And so, as I said, you've got the clash here between Hindu belief from their religious text and Western science. And so Twitter's users mark this trend. It's okay to be, first person, it's okay to be angry and embarrassed about the buffoonery claims that have been made at the Indian Science Congress, but this is really not the first time we have heard about controversial claims being made at every science congress ever since the Hindutva forces came to power. So you've got this conflict ongoing. Indian scientists have expressed their displeasure over the controversial comments. It makes me uncomfortable when pseudoscience statements are made from a platform like the Indian Science Congress, said one person, Kujigara, research scholar in the Department of Chemical Engineering at the Indian Institute of Technology. The idea of such events is to show the world India's scientific prowess, he said, but it makes you wonder what impression those Nobel laureates and other foreign scientist dignitaries will take from our country. So, next. And so the principal scientific advisor to the Prime Minister wrote in a blog post that the scientifically complete, untenable claims could cause harm if they were to find their way into public policy. Saying when lay people, including politicians, make random and untenable statements linking religion, culture, the past, etc., to science, the problem is to be addressed by collegial communication. When scientists make such links, they should be addressed more squarely. So he calls the pseudoscientists gorillas in the room and blames them for hijacking real scientific conversations. So it's unfortunate that this attack on Einstein's relativity got mixed in with the other things being said. And the article concludes, for next year's event, organisers intend to vet speeches, especially those meant for children, said Matthew, the Congress General Secretary. We've never censored scientists before. We expect them to motivate young minds and speak responsibly, but now each session will have to be closely monitored. We won't allow others to use our platform for their selfish reasons anymore, he said. So vet as in censor. So this attack on Einstein's relativity is getting mixed in with what the other people are saying about religion. And so they're going to censor all that sort of thing as pseudoscience because the belief is very strong in the mainstream Western science that Einstein is correct. So if you say Einstein is wrong, you're just going to get labelled as pseudoscience. They're not going to properly look at your criticisms. This thing gets managed to get reported by the BBC, and the BBC reports it as India scientists dismiss Einstein theories. And so the BBC is saying scientists in India have hit out speakers at a major conference for making irrational claims, including ancient Hindus invented stem cell research. Some academics at the annual Indian Science Congress dismissed the findings of Newton and Einstein. Hindu mythology and religion-based theories have increasingly become part of the Indian Science Congress agenda. But experts said remarks at this year's summit were especially ludicrous. The 106th Indian Science Congress, which is organized by Prime Minister Modi, ran from 3rd to the 7th of January. The head of Southern Indian University cited an old Hindu text as proof that stem cell research was discovered in India thousands of years ago. And Rao, Vice Chancellor of Andhra University, also said a demon king from the Hindu religious epic had 24 types of aircraft and a network of landing strips in modern-day Sri Lanka. Another scientist from a university in the southern state of Tamil Nadu told conference attendees that Newton and Einstein were both wrong, and that gravitational wave should be renamed Modi waves. So you get in this attack on Einstein's relativity getting mixed in with these other talks, even by the BBC. The BBC is mixing all this in together. So even with the BBC reporting the attack on Einstein's relativity gets swamped by the other things being said at that conference, or congress, sorry. And now on to another interesting thing. If somebody else seems to have tried to attack Einstein's relativity through India's Supreme Court. He was also attacking Darwin, but put aside that issue. And in this article, you got the Supreme Court rejects plea challenging scientific theories by Darwin, Einstein. So the Supreme Court dismissed the case that went before them. It says the Supreme Court on Friday dismissed PIL challenging Darwin's theory of evolution and Einstein's theory of special relativity that expresses the equivalence of mass and energy. A bench comprising Justice Sanjay and Justice another justice said that there cannot be a writ petition under Article 32 of the Indian Constitution to challenge scientific beliefs. And so I think that's interesting, they're saying scientific beliefs. So you got religious beliefs and you got scientific beliefs. So, and they do those sort of things to get merged together. It's sort of when people believe in Einstein's relativity, it's almost like a religion to them, but they're calling it a scientific belief. And so the petitioner wants to prove that Darwinian theory of evolution and Einstein's equation are wrong, and he wants a platform for the said purpose. If that is his belief, then he can propagate his own belief. But what is interesting is that there are scientists in India that don't like Einstein's relativity. Unfortunately, their attack on relativity gets mired in other issues. And so, as I've shown you the video, and so that's basically it. That's the problem with attacking Einstein's relativity in India. It gets mired in other issues, and those other issues are getting called pseudoscience. And so they're making out that to attack Einstein's relativity is also pseudoscience. So really, you can't properly have a scientific debate on Einstein's relativity because the mainstream is just too willing to dismiss you as not talking science. So thank you. That's the end of this little talk, and I should now open it up to discussion. Escape. Okay, let's see what we got. Oh, there's the stuff. Anybody want to put their hand up? So, nobody. 1, 2. No, looks like nobody's putting their hand up. Nobody immediately putting their hand up. So the main issues I'm pointing out, it's difficult to talk about Einstein's relativity being wrong even in India. And I've pointed out in a previous talk that it's difficult to talk about Einstein's relativity being wrong in China. And of course, most of us are in the West, and we are aware of the difficulty here of talking about Einstein's relativity being wrong. So it's pretty much seems to be probably worldwide that it's very difficult to open up talking about Einstein's relativity as being wrong as a serious scientific discussion. The mainstream are just too willing to dismiss such things as pseudoscience from whoever's advocating it. So what have we got here? Yeah, so good morning. Yeah, good morning, everybody. It's different times, different parts of the world. So Kevcon, his entire theory is pretty wacky. I watched the video, presumably Dr. Cannon's, and he thinks all science is wrong. Planets move because space squeezes them. Yeah, but when you go to Einstein's relativity, things are a bit strange anyway, because you've got space-time curvature. So if space-time squeezes, when that does tie in a bit with Einstein. Sorry, on next. Yeah. He says climate change is space squeezing the atmosphere. He thinks that light get dimmer with distance because space compresses light and converts it to dark matter. Yeah, well, it would be interesting to have an open discussion with him and people who don't believe that in the science community, but he's just getting dismissed as pseudoscience. Yeah. So yeah, Con points out it's also important to note that the next speaker to Cannon tried to give a religious lecture, and that's what the ISA objected to. Yeah, but it all gets mixed in with Dr. Cannon's talk. Dr. Cannon was trying to just talk about science, and that's getting dismissed as pseudoscience along with the sort of religious lectures. There isn't censorship just because he dissed Einstein. They're censoring future speakers from including religious content. No, I think that's still an ongoing argument going on in the India. That as the articles are pointing out, they're lumping in dissing Einstein with giving religious lectures. So at the moment, it's all those things that seem to be lumped in together as for things that they want to censor. So, yeah, watch the full video for yourself, pure lunacy. Well, it's difficult. I found it difficult without the slides. You can't see the slides. I'm just making that point that he's saying that Einstein's wrong, and people who say Einstein's wrong have got different reasons for believing that. So his question: if it was when the speaker introduced religion into the lecture, it's understandable that they object if it goes against the teaching of their holy books. Not really sure what that means, because if you go to Einstein, you've got Einstein's relativity, then you've got Einstein saying what seem to be religious things when he says God doesn't play dice with the universe. So even from Einstein, you're getting religious beliefs mixed in with scientific beliefs. So you've got that already. And unfortunately, when you go to India, I suppose you're mixing in their religious beliefs into science as well. So the speaker ought to focus primarily on the scientific ideas, I'd say. Yeah. But then how much of the religious stuff is he allowed to bring in? So is that any question or is being dishonest? I don't think I was. I was pointing out this, what the people were saying from religious point of view in their talks is getting mixed in with what Dr. Cannon was saying about Einstein being wrong, and they didn't really separate the two things in the articles, and it sounded like they were going to censor both things. Question says, I wouldn't say that necessarily. I just tuned in now, and I think that's a reply to KevCon. So I don't know what he means by this. Rob Robert says it seems to be mixing apples and oranges. They are different fruit. Well, it's mixing religion and science. And I think I'll try to explain that that's what was going on. Yeah. One funny part, the scientist wrote a paper about his theories and sent it to 40 heads of state of foreign countries. So I don't know what that following was. Yeah. He wrote to Stephen Hawking, who didn't bother to reply. I think that's canon, right, to Stephen Hawking. And I've written to Stephen Hawking when Stephen Hawking was alive, and I have never got really anywhere with that. So it's an ongoing thing. You can, if you're thinking Einstein's wrong, and you can write to these scientists who are supposed to believe in Einstein's relativity, you're not getting any comeback from them as to the issues you're trying to raise without it. So it's still ongoing. I don't know about that. So yeah. So, well, okay. Every country has crackpot scientists. Are you going to hear about different ones each week? No. I'm just pointing out the what happens in India, and a few weeks ago I pointed out what happens in China, and as I think most of us are aware, that anybody who's saying that Einstein's relativity is wrong in the West gets treated as a crackpot. So you automatically get treated as a crackpot, and you don't get any comeback from the scientists. They just see what you say and they say, oh, that's crackpot. They're not going to respond to it. I don't know. What should include one? I googled India Science Congress, Albert Einstein wrong, that sort of thing. I've come across this about Einstein being wrong from the Indian Congress, and there's lots more there. So, yeah, I think that's the video I linked us to, and it's the slides. Can't read the slides. So Robert K says, would you personally say that this is somewhat of a crackpot group? I know some might think so. So obviously the people sort of is disparaging people who say Einstein's relativity is wrong. They don't want to address that issue that you raise. They just want to dismiss you as a crackpot. So question says, I think it's good when Einstein's questioned, though, even if the ideas don't necessarily cohere. It means they're at least open to alternate ideas, which some could provide if possible. And as I pointed out, it's censored. It seems to be pretty much worldwide that it's censored. Again, what has been dishonest to do, which is canon, I think, is saying all science, including Einstein, attacked it. So it's untrue that we're going to censor relativity critics. Well, relativity critics do. Many of them start with Einstein, then move on to Einstein, and then on to everything else as well. So that is the general thing, that all of science ends up getting attacked. And one of the cases I pointed out was a person was attacking both Einstein's relativity and Darwin's evolution theory, and I've only concentrated on attacking Einstein's relativity. But people are like that; they end up attacking everything. So I don't think I'm being dishonest. I'm pointing out that there are people who will attack all of science, who attack Einstein and attack everything else. So there we go. So John Hodge says, how do we determine if a theory is scientific or not? And I think that's a great big problem. I don't see that as being properly addressed. I've had a science education, done a degree and so forth, and I don't think that's really properly addressed as when is a theory scientific or not. You can form lots of different theories about lots of different things. You can form theories about science, you can form theories about conspiracies, such as you don't believe that what they said about 9/11 was true, and so you've got 9/11 conspiracy theories and lots of conspiracy theories. Yeah, Einstein's ideas are tested and studied every day. Yeah, that's true. And those of us who disbelieve in Einstein's relativity criticize that. We don't agree that things are being said properly about those sort of things. So we disagree that the experiments were done properly, or that the correct inference were made from those experiments. So that all just ties in again. I'd say you could approach any theory scientifically. I don't see how. So, next one. If it is pseudoscience, one can demonstrate that with the relevant ideas and reasoning. Well, as I get older, I find that it's more difficult. I find that I've had a science education. Well, initially, I had confidence in what the teachers and lecturers and so forth, professors were saying to me, and now I've become more cynical in old age, and I think what they were teaching me was just pseudoscience. So the line between pseudoscience and science is very blurry in my point of view. So a lot of it is just attacking me, I think. So when I was just trying to point out the facts that Einstein's relativity just gets mired in India with their religious beliefs. Roger, that is exactly what you're engaging in scientific belief that Einstein is wrong. Well, I've looked at Einstein's relativity, and there's things in it that don't make sense, and I've pointed it out to various people. So I've sent letters to Professor Hawking when he's alive, and you don't really get any feedback. Isn't it just belief that Einstein was wrong? Though, well, everything seems to end up as belief, doesn't it? I've read Einstein's relativity. There's a lot of it doesn't make sense. So the people who believe in it seem to be having to believe things that don't make sense. Does India have many universities with physics programs? Well, I think the person I was pointing to, Cannon, he was one of their experts on physics, and he's looked at Einstein's relativity and decided it's wrong. So So things start going off in different directions. That isn't what your description says, though, Einstein. Whether they are talking about censoring people. So, and if you start talking about it, then you start doing it, and then when you're actually censoring people, you're not then saying that you're censoring them anymore. You're just blanking that out as well. So it's interesting to look at the India Science Conference to see if they ever allow any more Einstein is wrong talks. But at the moment they're talking about it, and so it seems to be that they're going to bring censorship in. I don't think I presented it was misleading. I tried to point out that the religious talks were getting mixed in with the scientific talks, and both religious and the scientific was getting mixed in as being called pseudoscience. Sort of go back to the beginning. So the title of my talk was that was the title of my talk. So they're talking about trying to censor future talks, and when I submitted this talk to be on StreamYard, this very long title I gave was shortened. Yeah, astrophysics is in a mess. It's all to do with Einstein's relativity. It is a mess, and it's not really, the physics establishment not really open to questioning Einstein's relativity. They're just believing it. So they're treating it as their own religion. So Andrew's saying it would be the same logical fallacy as when Roger said relativity is wrong because Einstein may have plagiarized his work. I don't think I said that. So I think I'm being misquoted there. I have pointed out that it looks like Einstein plagiarized his work. And if you're looking at people who are saying similar things to Einstein about what we now call relativity, then Einstein seems to be getting things wrong. So I don't think I put it in that way that I said relativity is wrong because Einstein may have plagiarized his work. I put it more in terms that Einstein may have plagiarized his work and not understand what these other people were saying, and so got it wrong. So that I haven't put it in those terms. So, even if you have evidence that Einstein plagiarized his work, it doesn't tell you anything about relativity being right or wrong. Well, whether Einstein plagiarized his work is a complicated question, and it's difficult to answer one way or the other. But assuming he did, then what Einstein is saying about the topic we call relativity is different to what other people were saying about relativity, from which he may have plagiarized. So you've got ambiguity in relativity. So it's wrong in the sense of being ambiguous. of different people saying different things about it. So I'm willing to scientifically believe that Einstein is wrong, lead me to the proof. So the problem there is with scientific beliefs, and the problem then is with proof as well. So I think when some people have pointed out that Einstein's relativity has never been proven, and then the people who support Einstein's relativity then come back, and if they accept that it's not been proven, they say, well, Einstein's relativity, no theory can be proven. All the best theory can do is to show whether it conforms to experiments. So suddenly, when it comes to proving theories, they make it all a grey area. So they just talk about whether theories conform to experiments, and there's never any such thing as proof. And so, of course, the problem then is with experiments, they can be interpreted by different theories. So it's a problematic term to ask for proof, because that's not seen to be what scientists do. They don't actually prove theories. They only say whether a theory agrees with experiment or not. And that's not quite the same thing as proving a theory as being better than any other theory which could agree with those experiments. Into if the maths shows the experiments, the theory is scientific. I don't know if it's defined that way. I don't know if a theory is defined as scientific by if the maths fits an experiment. So there's ambiguity again there. Yeah, I literally, I got back from research reactor testing a new detector using relativity. Yeah, so what? People believe different things when they refer to relativity. If we can find any good other comments down here. So anybody want to put their hand up in the green room? I think I can say they're just these comments in the chat are just rambling on. They don't seem to really address the issue of science seems to be censored in India, or attempting to be censored in India, and as from my experiences in the West, it does seem to censored. What a presentation today. So might be trying to be sarcastic. Okay, it's Harry, I think. Put his hand up. My eyesight's never that good. Did you put your hand up, Harry? Harry? Yeah, Harry's got his hand up. Okay, Harry. Hi. Hello. Thank you. Okay.
Looks like we have some people with different definitions of what they think science is in this Indian science conference. So that's kind of an issue in my mind. I guess the religious people believe that religion is knowledge, and since science is defined as knowledge, therefore they're talking about science. So it looks to me like they don't have a very good definition of what science is. And that seems to be a problem. But my question is, Was this guy talking about some kind of an ether theory? When he gave his presentation, it sounded like he was talking about Lesage's ether theory, some kind of Lesage type of ether theory. And
I was actually leaving it up to people to research that if they wanted to. I was just pointing out that there's a problem with trying to openly discuss Einstein's relativity being wrong in India. That was the main issue I was highlighting.
Well, physics has apparently got some problems, and there's some issues. If you look on the internet, there's a number of videos where they discuss physics isn't making any progress. Physics hasn't made any breakthroughs in the last 50 years. And they all talk about quantum mechanics, and they seem to talk about the unification of quantum gravity, quantum mechanics, and Einstein's relativity. But nobody seems to be looking at Einstein's relativity as being wrong, which kind of surprises me. They seem to be looking at more at, are the modern theories wrong, and how can we change these modern theories, U1 times SU2 times SU3. Oh, that's a good theory, but somehow they're not positively happy with this theory. We haven't made any breakthroughs. I don't know what they mean by that. I mean, it sounds to me like there's some dissidents going on in the science community, but they don't really want to have it become too public.
Yeah.
But it seems to me that if you're not really looking at what happened, what Einstein did, which they're not really looking at very closely as far as I can see, because they assume that, that part seems to be untouchable. So that seems to be the sacred cow of physics.
Yeah.
Einstein
it seems to be taboo. It seems to be taboo to attack Einstein.
So I guess basically sitting here and saying that Einstein is wrong and pointing out people who disagree with Einstein and how they're being suppressed, I don't see that's really accomplishing much. The physics community essentially tied themselves in knots by saying, well, we got a problem. We're not really sure where the problem is.
Your sound's breaking out again.
We got a problem. We're kind of stymied. I don't know why they're saying that. I'm not sure why there are people who feel there's a problem in science, and yet they're not looking at Einstein. That seems strange.
I don't know how much awareness people have about the public, because it's the public that it's a problem. There's a big problem with trying to form a conversation about Einstein's relativity being wrong, because there's so many obstacles put in your way. You're sort of like, if you're saying that, you're immediately dismissed as pseudoscience and a crackpot. So they don't even have that debate with with people in the mainstream who believe in it. You can't even sort of get there. And I was pointing out.
Well, it seems to me like they're promoting, the other side of the coin is, what do they mean by pseudoscience? They use these words. The word that was used is pseudoscience. I'm not sure what that means. So we need a definition of what that means. And it seems to me like when we had this problem here in the United States with Fauci, where he declared that I am the science, and made it into a political issue. So he made a scientific discussion into a political issue. So so it became here in the United States that you were spreading disinformation if you disagreed with
you got censored. You got
Fauci guy was saying, and turned out that Fauci wasn't telling people the truth, even though he declared that he was the science.
Well, during the time that there were people that were saying what Fauci was saying is wrong, and they were finding themselves getting censored on the internet.
Well, that's no different than people that are saying that Einstein's wrong. So scientists seem to be supporting their position by censorship and not by convincing people. So I think there's a real problem with science if they can only maintain their belief system by censoring people rather than convincing people that what they're saying is true. So they seem to have a problem with convincing.
Yeah, but the general public, they're naive and they don't think that science is like that. They think things are openly discussed. So if someone's
that's a political issue. People on YouTube are saying that it's wrong for the public to trust these generals who make pronouncements about the Ukraine war. So there's nothing new about any of this. And science is a form of politics to a certain extent, because these guys, scientific people, are advising leaders in government, and so science is basically political. It has a political aspect to it.
Yeah.
And they claim that they're right because they're the science. I just explained that with Fauci. So the issue is that to claim that you have the truth and scientists are telling you the truth has a credibility problem, and they're not addressing the credibility problem. That's what I'm saying. In the case of Einstein, there's a credibility problem. It looks to me like this guy in India, you also pointed out last week, this fellow. And, and when I was leader of the relativity discussion group, I used to get pretty regularly papers from people who are pretty smart people who claim that Einstein was wrong. And there are very diverse groups of people from different countries, not all from the United States. And they all complain that they're being censored and suppressed and want some kind of attention. And these people are not crackpots, I don't think.
Yeah.
They're people who basically are serious. A lot of them are engineering people, which is interesting because engineers
get dismissed as not understanding physics.
Well, engineers are more critical of, you have to show me. Engineers are more critical about show me, and they're not really convinced. And these people are mathematically adept. They're not mathematically incompetent. They're familiar with the language that's being used. They're familiar with the mathematics that's being used, and they don't find it to be convincing. So the issue is, you have to make your position, if you're promoting I am the voice of scientific truth, you have to make your argument convincing, and it's just not.
Well, trying to get your argument convincing with Einstein's relativity is difficult, because you can pick on lots of different things which you think are wrong with it, and so you can come at it from lots of different directions, and then you don't get.
Well, they need to clean up all these points of ambiguity and confusion, and they haven't done that. There's points of confusion in the experimental claims that the experiments, thousands of experiments every day prove Einstein's theory is correct. Yes, those same experiments also prove that Lorentz's theory is correct. So, that doesn't really.
I don't think the experimental papers don't really go, in my opinion, into enough detail about Lorentz theory versus Einstein's theory. They don't actually.
Well, because Einstein's theory is ambiguous, as you pointed out, and it's not a really well-defined theory, although
that's right. Yeah,
they claim the mathematicians claim it to be.
But the people that are doing the experiments, they don't seem to go into enough explanation when they're talking about the theories, and instead they just say, "Oh, this experiment shows Einstein is correct," and they don't really explain what they understand by Einstein's relativity, because some of them will have a Lorentzian type of interpretation of relativity and others won't. So that's they're not explaining that difference in the papers.
Well, there are a couple of possibilities. One is Einstein's wrong. His special relativity theory is wrong, which implies that the principle of relativity is false. And so are people saying Einstein's wrong, or they're saying that his principle of relativity is false? Is that what they're saying? Not real clear. Then you have, like this guy in India, he apparently is saying that not so much the special relativity theory is false, but I think he's saying that general relativity is false, because general relativity is a theory of gravitation, and he thinks that the theory of gravitation is something else.
Well, it's
So that's
supposed
another.
it's supposed to be general relativity is built on special relativity.
Well,
So
correct, but
attack on general relativity is really a bit of an attack on special relativity as well.
right. So now you have this other issue, which is people who think that there's an ether and that ether exists pretty much dismiss Einstein's special relativity right from the get-go, because it asserts or appears to assert that there is no ether. Although, then you get into this confusion thing of, well, general relativity implies there's an ether. And then Einstein, in that famous talk that he gave in 1921, I think it was, he sort of seemed to imply that there was an ether and that general relativity said that there was an ether. And so that confuses people. They never cleared up any of that. Correct. It's not really clear to me whether what general relativity is a theory about. It's a theory about space and time. So is it just a model of how space and time are to be understood in terms of the model, or is it a description of how space and time actually behave? It's not really clear to me. That's another point of ambiguity.
Ambiguities there.
So
with the when Einstein seems to be saying there's an ether in 1920, it doesn't seem to then be making it clear that special relativity is a theory which is not dealing with an ether. But if you want to deal with the ether, then you go to general relativity. It's not saying anything as clear worded as that, so it leads to all this confusion, and people who understand Einstein's relativity just from, say, special relativity and not having studied general relativity will say there's no ether. So that leads to confusion on there. Are they, when they're talking about, people's talking about there's no ether, are they just basing that on a belief in special relativity, or are they saying that belief then extends to general relativity or whatever? So it's just more ambiguity. Einstein didn't really make things very clear.
Well, I think that's pretty obvious. It's all hidden behind mathematical formalism. So what you have in physics today, one of my big problems, there are very few books that talk about experimental physics, and many textbooks that talk about mathematics. So what we have today is physics is just basically mathematics and not much physics. And we're supposed to believe that physics is a science of the natural world, when very little about physics actually talks about the natural world. In physics books, there's very little talk about experiments and how experiments actually justify. If you get a book on a physics book, it's full of mathematics and not full of any experiments. So experiments are just sort of thrown in as an afterthought. So one wonders, how can physics be an empirical science, given that everything about it is just mathematics?
Yeah, I did refresh my memory about the education system. I did a relativity course last year. It was 10 sessions of 2 hours, and see what they were teaching for relativity. When it came to the experiments, they just listed the experiments, say all these experiments agree with Einstein's relativity, and they don't explain how does that agree with them. They don't go through each experiment and explain how does that experiment agree with Einstein's relativity. They miss that out, and they also miss out talking about Lorentz theory versus Einstein's theory. They don't go into that. There's nothing about that at all. And they don't say anything about Einstein saying in 1920, which he seems to be saying there is an ether in 1920. They don't do any of that. And they don't go into the issue of, well, maybe you could interpret those experiments by different theories other than relativity. So they just miss all that out. And so they're just teaching you a dogma. Oh, do all this maths, talk about these things about twin paradox and barn pole paradox. And then it's sort of like, well, here's the list of experiments that agree with Einstein's relativity. So it's proven by experiment. And they're not explaining the difficulties with that. So
it's basically catechism.
Sorry?
You know, in the Catholic Church, you have a catechism, which are the dogmatic beliefs that you accept if you're a Catholic. And so I don't really see that science and talking about relativity is any different. So to me, it seems like they've lost the ability to convince. I'm not convinced anymore when I see it's all just catechism.
It's sort of like relativity has become sort of like a religion within the science community. And so they believe it.
Well, I think science is just like that in general. I mean,
well, I haven't looked
probably
really outside, say, Darwin's theory or anything like that. I've concentrated a lot on relativity. So maybe it's like that elsewhere. But I'm concentrating on.
Well, I can understand why the religious people in India would think that science and that to go to a science conference and start talking about their religious beliefs, because they don't really see a difference. What is the difference? And the difference is that the people who run the committee decide who gets to talk. And so that's basically censorship, and that's been around for a long time. That's how governments and people in power control what people believe. So I don't really see that science is offering people any different way of establishing or certifying what they should believe. So if I'm a person and looking at what scientists are saying, I'm not really sure I should believe them. Why should I believe them as opposed to believing somebody who's a religious person? Why is that truth? What does a scientist have to demonstrate that his claim, his belief, you know, he gets up on television or on YouTube and spouts out a lot of stuff and claims, you know, black holes exist in the centers of galaxies. Why should I believe that black holes exist in the centers of galaxies? Just because he said so.
It's supposed to be built up. They've done the experiments that they can actually do, and then based upon that, then they speculate further on up, or theorize further up into the things.
So it's all speculation. So why should I trust a lot of speculation?
Well, it's supposed to be built on a foundation of experiments.
Well, they don't show me what the experiments are. When I go to a book and I want to find out what's the basis of you believing this, and I open up the book and it's just a bunch of mathematics. I mean, I get these books I've got tons of books on cosmology, and very few of them actually talk about any of the experimental facts that they claim prove anything. It's all just mathematical formulations of theory. So as far as I could see, it's all just speculation about mathematics. So where's the actual scientific facts that prove things?
Well, it's problematic of what is a scientific fact, because they are placing their interpretation on things like the redshift as to what it means.
Well, it's because they say so.
Yeah.
Okay, now the redshift.
You're aware of objects like cars and that moving and fire engines moving, and the sound has the Doppler shift and so forth. And so they're just building upon that and saying this does the same with light. So they're building from experiments they can actually do to then talk about, well, this must be happening to galaxies out there. They've got their redshift going on.
Yeah, but it's based on assumptions, and those assumptions are not ever clearly stated.
Well, I think
so. What are the assumptions?
For what? Sorry. For the expansion of the universe. For the assumption for that. Have you frozen? I think. Have you frozen?
I'm not really saying anything.
Okay. No, they're supposed to build on what they've tested.
Well, but if your foundations are questionable, I mean, it's all built on relativity, and relativity is kind of questionable. It's not really convincing, and that's the whole point. Make it convincing. So they've got a theory. They've got all these theories and all these claims, and they look out with these telescopes and say they discovered this and they found this and all this stuff, and it's all based on. We speculate. It's based on a pile of speculations. Things pile on top of piles. All this mathematics and speculation, and I think this proves this mathematical equation over here. Well, it's not that convincing. So why should I accept it? And at every step of this ladder that we go up, where we're supposed to believe things about the universe, which ultimately is a form of religion. So science is telling us how. Ultimately, when you get to cosmology is basically kind of a religion. And so science is saying, we can give you a belief about how the world began that's better than religion. But when you look at it, you find out that it's all based on a pile of questionable assumptions and assertions that may or may not be true. So why should I believe it?
They do have open questions. They sort of like the origin of the universe.
Well, there's lots of open questions everywhere. So the question is, why should I believe any of it? Why should I believe it?
They've got dark energy, dark matter, and lots of other things, and it's question mark they haven't got answers to. So,
well, what all Andy Castro does is puts in these snide comments into the chat. Okay, so he believes in all this stuff, but other people don't. Other people don't. I'm not convinced. Other people are not convinced. I'm not convinced about Einstein's relativity. I'm not convinced about black holes. I'm not convinced about the Big Bang. I'm not convinced that any of these things that you say, quarks and gluons and all this stuff, SU1, SU2, SU3, all this is a proven standard model of physics, and we can explain everything about matter, et cetera, et cetera. But when they go to tell me how the Big Bang created matter in the universe, it turns out that theory doesn't work at all. That theory doesn't work because it gives too much, it predicts that antimatter and matter are in equal proportions. So there's something wrong with that theory because it's based on symmetry. So every particle has to have an antiparticle. Well, why do we live in a universe that doesn't have antiparticles in it, except when we make them in nuclear and particle accelerators? Well, there's a problem with that theory. And then they claim, there has to be monopoles. Magnetic monopoles have to be created by this theory. There aren't any magnetic monopoles. Where are they? They can't find them. So there's something wrong with their theory. We know there's something wrong with our theory, but they don't want to go back and look at the foundations. They don't want to go back and look at Einstein. Maybe they ought to, and they're just not doing it.
Yeah. Well, they don't want to have that debate. They don't want to give a platform to people.
Well, so science is not about questioning. It's not about looking at the world and evaluating different viewpoints. It's more about getting a position in government and telling government what to believe. That seems to be the case. That's pretty much one of the main objections to religion during the Middle Ages, was that the government and the Catholic Church were pretty much the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah, they were the same. Well, parts of Europe, they were the same thing. The religious authority and the political authority were joined together. So now you've got the scientific advisors to government, and they sort of like dismiss the religious point of view, or try to dismiss the religious point of view, other than sort of like keeping religious people happy to the best they can. They're trying to promote an atheist scientific point of view. That's might be a problem what's happening in America now with the Trump and all that stuff. Trump is going with the religious people, and the religious people don't like what the atheists and so forth are doing with society. So it's all political in the end.
Well, we
Hey,
have
thank
an atheistic government in the West. I mean, that's not really much, I don't think, that you can debate. I mean, that's a pretty common. I think you have that problem in Britain. I think you have that problem in the European Union. We have that problem here. And that particular view of how to go about doing things isn't really working out in the Ukraine war, and it's not working out with the in other areas where they've convinced the government that they claim that 97% of scientists claim that climate change is true, and they're spending billions and billions of dollars and not accomplishing anything, and doesn't seem to be any climate change to be worried about.
I haven't really seen any big debate between people who believe in climate change and people who don't. But really, when you say climate change, you really mean man-made climate change, and sort of like the alternative point of view is that it's more.
Well, I know in Britain, the government has spent billions and billions of money, and they really, now that the Labour Party is in charge, they're really sticking their neck out on their quote alternatives to fossil fuels. And I feel sorry for you guys in Britain, because it looks like it's going to be pretty grim there, because of some bad science is being used to justify bad political policies. So this whole issue of the validity of science, I think, is bigger than just whether Einstein's relativity is right or wrong.
Yeah. It's politics, yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I noticed with the Labour, the Conservative Party was in, and they messed everything up, and then the Labour Party promised that they sort it all out. So the Labour Party came into power, and then Labour Party made loads of promises, and they got into power, and they said, "Oh, the money's not there. All the money's gone." So we're having difficulty to keep our promises. So it's always blame it on the last government, and it's all right.
Well, it looks to me like there's this big social experiment going on based on a scientific belief that doesn't really seem to be valid. There seems to be this scientific belief that doesn't seem to be valid at all about anthropogenic climate change, and the idea that we can fix this problem by spending all this money and engaging in having the government engage in economic policies that look to be completely misguided based on a false scientific belief. Seems to me this is a problem for science, because it looks like it's heading in the wrong direction, and it's going to be very harmful, or it is already harmful from what I've heard about what's going on in Britain. And to justify for science to be captured by the political system seems to me a big problem. And we see that in the case of Einstein's relativity, that they use the political system to essentially suppress dissent regarding his theory, which there seems to be a rather large body of dissent regarding special relativity and general relativity and its validity.
Part of it is in the general public's mind, that Einstein's relativity has been pretty much proven conclusively by the atom bomb. E equals mc squared. Einstein's right. Atom bomb.
Well, it doesn't really matter. I guess as far as the scientific community is concerned, that they can convince the general public or whoever they are that it's right, but they certainly haven't convinced everybody, and that seems to be the case.
With the small minority that disagree with Einstein's relativity, they just seem to ignore. They're not going to give them a platform to debate it with people that do believe in it.
As far as I can see, The issue is their responsibility to clean up the mess, and they've not really shown any desire to clean up the mess.
Well, from their belief, there isn't that sort of mess. They're waiting for somebody to.
Well, I mean, there's got to be a mess if people think that Einstein's wrong. There's got to be some reason that people think Einstein's wrong.
They don't accept. Their belief is they don't accept that. They believe in Einstein's relativity, and so the problems you got, like,
well, but that's not science. That's not science.
They're just looking for people.
So they're basically not following
that in the context of relativity.
They're not following their own procedures, so they violated their own ethics.
Right, it does all bend up in belief in the end, I think. They believe they're doing it right.
Well, so it's back to trust us. We believe we're doing it right, so trust us. Yeah. Which goes back to the Fauci thing where he said, "I'm the science. Trust me, I'm doing it right." And it turned out, oops, they didn't do it right.
Well, they're still arguing, I think, over that, isn't it?
Well,
what I've seen is people arguing over it still.
I mean, the people here in the United States don't want to take any COVID vaccines because of the view that the vaccine made them sicker than the actual COVID did.
They've had that about the other vaccines when it was at the MMR, where people didn't want to take that either.
Yeah, that's the one that people were complaining about.
People
so that wasn't very good science. Fauci said, "Trust me, I'm the science," and it turned out that people got sicker by taking the vaccine than they got from the COVID, and it turned out that they got COVID even though they had taken the vaccine. So there wasn't very good science there.
Taking the vaccine was supposed to stop you getting COVID. Then they changed it. It was to reduce your risk.
But the real point here is it's about you have to make your case. Science doesn't really make their case that well. They're not that convincing. And one of the areas that's really not convincing is Einstein's relativity and general relativity and a lot of other aspects of it. Then, of course, when you get into the particle physics stuff, that's way out of the mathematics there is way, way, way difficult to really even comprehend or understand. And the fact that they're thinking that there's something wrong at that level is kind of disturbing. So it just seems to me that science, the credibility of science, of people who are scientists, isn't really that great. And we really, they shouldn't really be trusted any more than the politicians should be trusted just because they say so.
Trust nobody.
Well, it would be better. It would be better if instead of suppressing this guy at the Indian Science Conference, it would have been better if they had continued to let him come up and give talks. Would the case in the Chinese?
I don't know.
I mean, to me, I don't really understand. I don't understand why they feel the need to suppress. To me, when they're saying we need to suppress this or we need to say that it's wrong or call him a crackpot, that's not exactly the correct response to give.
I don't know how far this censorship was going. Maybe he can fight his way through and give another talk at the Science Congress. I don't know. But really, there should be a sort of like debate about Einstein's relativity in everywhere, really.
Well, I don't think they really are willing to do that because they probably lose in an open debate.
Well, you get debates between politicians, say like Trump and Biden come out and debate, and so the one person seems to come up on top of the other. So really, it should be the same sort of thing in science. That you get one expert on one side versus another expert on the other side, and see which looks most convincing. But they don't do that. So that's the way it is. So pretty much, the mainstream have control over the dogma in science that going along.
Well, it looks to me like they're no different than the Catholic Church during the Middle Ages. No different than the communists in Russia and China. That they suppress any dissent with respect to the dogma, and this is not particularly. I mean, I don't really see why I should believe in a system that claims to philosophically claims to have some kind of access to the truth when basically they maintain truth by suppressing dissidents.
Yeah, that's human nature, I think. That's the way.
But that doesn't excuse it. It's not the fact that it's human nature doesn't excuse that they're doing it.
Well, how do you change human nature? I don't know. You've got the different sort of like compartmentalization of science. You just look at the physics bit. You've got the experimental physics, you've got the theoretical physics, the mathematical physics, you've got the philosophy of physics, you've got the history of physics, and you've got the education system of teaching physics, and lots of other subdivisions from that. So the whole thing doesn't seem to be coordinated, apart from putting this dogma on that Einstein's relativity is correct, and it's not something which is going to be allowed to be openly debated.
Well, there's nothing new about the fact that the educational system is not really doing very well in terms of what its objective is supposed to be. They've been under fire, and I think justifiably so. The education system has failed Western civilization rather badly in the last 20, 50 years. That's nothing particularly new about that. What's really a problem is that they don't recognize that there's a problem that needs to be fixed. That's where the problem is. The problem is they don't recognize there's a problem. They keep doing, doing the same thing they've been doing for years and years, and
they got their beliefs. Yeah, their beliefs is that what they're doing is right, and they don't see it from a point of view of let's put down this. We've got this point of view. We've got this point of view. Let's discuss it. They don't look at it that way. They think, this point of view is right. We go with that, and then they don't want talking about the other point of view. And that sort of seems to be everywhere.
So the bottom line is that science is basically a system that claims to have access to the truth by virtue of it suppresses dissidents.
Seems to, yeah.
So I don't think that's a very good recommendation for adopting science.
Well, they don't admit that's what they're doing, but that's what they do.
So the bottom line is it's all just trust me because I'm a scientist.
Yeah. And if it's another point of view which showed that I was wrong, then you would hear about it. But they then don't mention that point of view is censored. So they got it best of both worlds. So, thank you. I see if there's anything else is coming up. I don't think anybody else has put their hand up. James, I think, gone to sleep there. But so I did. That was all I really wanted to point out, that in India, if you're trying to get the message across that Einstein's relativity is wrong, then it seems to be being blocked in the same sort of way that we're used to in the West. There's no debate on these things.
Again, if Einstein's theory is correct, then there's no threat to be having a guy say that Einstein is wrong is not a threat to them if Einstein's theory is actually correct and they have the actual convincing proof of it. I think the issue is they don't want somebody saying that it's wrong because they really can't defend that it's correct. That's the impression I get.
Probably. I mean, when it comes to these educators, how many people really have a deep understanding of Einstein's relativity to realize that it might not be right? they don't have that. They're just taking it on faith from what they've been taught as well. So,
right. But here again, if it's correct and they know it's correct, why is somebody offering an alternative interpretation a danger to them that requires that he be suppressed?
They can't seem to think through that. If there's an alternative, they can't seem to think through that. They think what they got is good enough. So it's sort of like if you're supposed to test a theory with experiment, and if somebody comes along with a different theory, then that theory is supposed to predict something different to the theory you got, and that's what they go back on. And so if you say, oh, I got a new theory and it should replace Einstein's relativity, they say, well, what does it predict that Einstein's relativity doesn't predict? And when you get down to it, Einstein's relativity is a mess. It can be manipulated to say pretty much anything from an experiment. So that's how they blocked everything from that direction. But ideally, you're testing that theory against that theory. But now, with Einstein's relativity being ambiguous, it's sort of like that protects it. They shouldn't have accepted an ambiguous theory, but they did, and now it's sort of like protected from the scientific method.
By ambiguous, you mean not really well defined in terms of what it's about and what it supposedly predicts.
Yeah.
Because the way it stands now, you could interpret the experiments with different theories, and you get the Lorentz theory is just as good as Einstein's theory. So why is Einstein's theory to be preferred? And then
you're supposed to have no ether. No, so you've got rid of something which you don't really need.
Well, that looks increasingly. Well, that's one of the big problems of his theory, which is that, is he really saying there is no ether? And that's really just another point of ambiguity.
Yeah,
and,
ambiguous.
Well, that's a big point of ambiguity, and so I discussed that earlier. Does general relativity mean there is an ether, or mean there isn't an ether? And what does it mean? What does it mean that space is curved and time changes? What does all that stuff mean? It just seems just complete. It's not really about anything to say space is curved. That doesn't really mean anything, because space is a nothing.
Yeah,
it's not anything. Of course, what is space in Einstein's theory? That's even not really well defined.
When you go to quantum physics, you sort of like you end up finding that empty space isn't empty. You've got these virtual particles. So,
well, but sort of quantum mechanics has the problem that it doesn't really say anything that's real. It just says everything is a statistical probability.
Yeah.
That's not very helpful, really.
So statistically, you've got an empty space, but you can have quantum fluctuations, and suddenly that nothingness is actually a something. And
so we're back to the real problem then. What is space? Okay, that's a problem that's not really clearly well defined. And then in cosmology, we're said that space is expanding. But what does that even mean, to say that space is expanding? I mean, space can expand because it's a nothing. So So an expanding nothing doesn't. How does that affect anything physical?
It seems to be from special relativity. You are defining space-time as flat in that context, and then when you go into general relativity, you are expanding on that, and you're allowing space-time to be curved. So it's sort of like it's the ambiguity of going from special relativity to general relativity, which is happening there. So suddenly, if space is curved, so you've got two objects, right? And then the space is being curved. Well, then maybe that's happening at the same time as they're trying to move through it. So suddenly you've got sort of like two different types of motion. The motion of space itself and the motion of objects within that space. And so then it all gets very confusing.
Well, the term space isn't very clearly defined as to what they're talking about.
Yeah, well, that seems to be what they're talking about. Space-time is flat in special relativity.
Well, space-time is just a mathematical abstraction.
Yeah.
It's not anything physical.
Yeah. Well,
so it's a mathematical abstraction.
The problem with what you mean by physical, isn't it? You're making distance measurements and you're making time interval measurements. So
yeah, but it's a mathematical abstraction.
Yeah, but you're making measurements, which is maths, and then you're applying it to a theory.
Well, so what are you measuring? You're measuring an abstraction.
Yeah, you're measuring the distance and you're measuring time interval and things like that.
It's just mathematics. It's not really physics.
Yeah. Well, you're actually physically measuring a distance, so that's supposed to be physical.
Well, they claim they're measuring the distance.
Yeah, and so you got the number of how far apart something is, and that's maths, and that maths is supposed to apply to something that's physical. But it's sort of like kind of like trying to just dismiss it all as mathematical is not really quite the right way as I see it, because mathematics is a tool from which physicists use, and so it's the language they're using.
Oh, what? So okay, so now we're just basically it's a tool and not a reality.
It's what the language is a tool. So,
well, the point is basically it's not real clear to me what space is. And then time becomes also particularly ambiguous in Einstein's theory. What does time mean? What does it mean to have time dilate? What does that even mean?
Well, people's clocks are supposed to be different, aren't they? So you kind of like you've got person A and a person B, and their clocks are measuring different time intervals, and then you kind of like getting the relativity principle into it to confuse everything. But if you say my clock is slower, I know the thing say your clock is slower.
It's not really
so like, well, how is that possible? That's nonsense and all that sort of stuff.
It's not really physics. So the bottom line is it's not really physics, and I think that's really the bottom. I think that's really where the real objection comes from. Why people are saying that Einstein.
I understand how you're defining physics there.
Well, I don't think they feel that it's really physics. That's the point. People looking at this go, this isn't really a physical theory. It's just math. It's metaphysics. And
the math is supposed to apply to something physical.
Yeah, and then you do an experiment and you say, oh, look here, it proves that this metaphysical, mathematical abstraction actually describes reality. And they believe that. And the bottom line is there are people who don't believe that. And the issue is they haven't convinced people who don't believe in the metaphysical, mathematical abstractions. That's not convincing to people. And they don't see it as physics. That's really the issue. That's why people don't like relativity and Einstein. That's kind of my feeling as to really the bottom of it. And so people then say, okay, I want something physical. I want an ether, something that's physical. I want to believe in an ether. That's their alternative.
Yeah.
So Einstein drives people to believing in an ether because the ether is something that's physical. It's not an abstract metaphysical thing that Einstein is proposing.
It starts off as a medium for light, and so it's sort of like metaphysical in that sense. So like you're wanting to believe light is a wave, and as a wave, it would then need a medium. It's sort of like that is metaphysical. It's a description, but if you're describing things that way, with the mainstream, they don't really explain how that connects to what they're saying. So when they say there's no ether, well, how does that connect to another person who says there is an ether? So they're talking about it from one metaphysics, another person talking it from a different way, and it's like, how do the two things combine into one thing? How does what he say connect to what you're saying? And they don't go into that. They just leave it as, well, he's saying different to me, so therefore he's crackpot. Just ignore him.
Well, you're kind of left with a problem of space. What is space and what is time? And then, there are abstractions, and physics is really, modern physics is really based on these abstract concepts that are basically mathematical abstractions of metaphysical ideas, and there's no physical reality there. Where's the physical reality? Where's the physics? And I think that's what the Indian guy was getting at in his talk. At least that was the impression that I got.
Okay.
That he was trying to talk about space as being a physical thing. And the reason that Einstein was wrong was because in Einstein's view, space and time are not physical things. They're metaphysical, mathematical abstractions. And he wanted space to be something that was physical and that could be described in what he thought physical terms. That's the impression I got from the very brief bit that you presented.
Yeah. I wasn't really concentrating on that, but I was just pointing out that whatever he's saying, there's going to be a tendency to try to censor it in future science congress things. Maybe he can get around that censorship, but at the moment
we're not supposed to believe that space has any physical characteristics. It's just a mathematical entity described by Minkowski space-time. So it's Minkowski space-time is the ultimate reality. There's no physical reality other than Minkowski space-time.
You kind of like talk about relativity, but then when you go to quantum physics, you've got to say how.
Well, they don't really connect together very well.
That's what they're wanting to find, is how quantum physics talks about things. How does that connect with how relativity talks about things?
And then of course, what you have is in general relativity, you have that the Minkowski space-time is locally flat, depending upon what you define by locally, and then globally it's curved. And so basically you're still talking about a mathematical entity, a mathematical abstraction that you claim to be physical reality. That's hard for people to accept.
Yeah,
I think they need a better theory.
That locally and globally, it seems to be ambiguous terms. Locally seems to be if you ignore gravity, and globally means if you're not ignoring gravity. But whether that is correct, I don't know. It seems when you read these things, it seems to be ambiguous.
Well, I can see why this guy would want gravity to be. So what you have now is you have that the force of gravity is connected to this abstract mathematical, metaphysical idea about space-time being curved. And so gravity is an expression of an abstract entity. And so this gravity is the curvature of space-time.
I think
that's not
James
physics.
Putting his hand up. I just trying to keep an eye on it. Obviously spoken. You're not. James, did you have your hand up, or you just spoken? Sorry, Harry. You don't.
Well, I've carried on the conversation for a while here.
Okay,
the guy in India, his name is Krishnan. It's not what you're saying. You were calling him by first name, which is sort of like.
I found that easier to say.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Is that it? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Cheers. Yeah, I omitted saying some of the words and I couldn't say them. Thank you. Okay, thank you. I think that covers it really. I'm unsure as to what to do next. I got stuff on the myths of relativity, and I've got stuff saying that the principle of relativity is ambiguous. So it's one of those two directions I'm going in. But I was just highlighting the difficulty of trying to get across that not everybody understands, not everybody believes in Einstein's relativity, and they just seem to censor it across the world.
Well, why should people believe in it? It's just a metaphysical abstraction connected to some mathematics that's based on a principle that's obscure and unclear, a principle of relativity. What the heck does that mean?
Mm-hmm.
And leads to paradoxical.
That could be a topic for thought. What
Result in the theory, huh?
Yeah, that could be a topic for that's one of the things.
So the mathematics of it leads to paradoxical. Mathematical paradoxes, which they claim. Then they bring in, some stuff about relativity of simultaneity to avoid the mathematical paradoxes that arise. And it's just, and then we're supposed to believe this stuff is real physics, that it represents the real world in some way. That's really just hard for people to swallow.
Mm-hmm.
They need to go back and rethink what they're doing. It's just not being swallowed by people. People just aren't accepting it.
Well, some people are not accepting Einstein's relativity. if you go through the education system,
if you have one person who's a really smart guy and really well-educated smart guy, and people who are objecting to Einstein are smart, well-educated people, seems to me there's a problem there.
Yeah. I think what happens if you're a smart person, if you've gone through academia, and you decide you're a very clever, brilliant genius sort of thing, and if you then start saying, "Oh, Einstein's wrong," just decide you've gone mad. You've suddenly become a crackpot, and that seems to be how they do it. Okay.
Well, the other side of the coin is there's so many different ways that you can say that Einstein's wrong.
Yeah.
Okay. There's so many different interpretations of what you can put onto that statement. What does that statement even mean? It's kind of unclear exactly what it means.
Einstein said a lot of things. I think he said stuff about black holes, and you could latch onto that and say,
Einstein apparently didn't believe in black holes, and yet now they're telling us, that his theory predicts black holes. I mean, that's just
so he's correct from his theory that black holes exist, but his personal opinion is wrong. So they then try to swap that around, don't they?
It's just a lot of. I mean, I just don't think it's physics, and I think that anybody who takes that view is justified in thinking it.
Yeah, but he's done things like he thought the universe was static, and then Hubble made his astronomical observations, and they decided from that the universe expanding. Put aside the issue, you probably disagree with that, but then Einstein said he was wrong. So Einstein has been wrong, and he's admitted he's been wrong. So you've got all that. So when you say Einstein's wrong, there is cases where
as I'm pointing out, there's many different ways. This Indian guy seems to be arguing that general relativity is wrong because it's a wrong interpretation of how gravity works. And that was my take on what he was saying. And I think it's a legitimate argument to make because what general relativity seems to say, I mean, on the surface, it seems to say that that space-time is curved by matter, and that causes matter to move through space-time such that there's a gravitational effect. And that seems very unphysical to me. And I would assume that this Indian fellow finds it to be very unphysical. He wants a theory of a physical theory of how gravity works. That's my impression of what he's saying.
Newton deals with things by forces. So when Einstein starts talking about things,
well, I think he's talking about ether. I think he's got some kind of an ether concept in it, and it's pressure. The ether exerts a pressure, and that's what gravity is.
Newton said non-hypothesis is something he didn't want to hypothesize about certain issues like that, I think. So Newton got so far in his theorizing and then decided he wasn't going to go even further with it. So, but Newton talks about forces, and in Einstein's relativity you talk about space-time curvature. So when you talk about space-time curvature, what do you really mean? Do you just mean forces? Is that force? So, and that sort of thing is ambiguous as well. So
well, it's a mathematical abstraction. Descartes argued in terms of these ether vortexes that carried the planets around the sun in this vortex motion. And Newton had it was just a mathematical equation that basically came from Hooke and this inverse square law. And so he did a mathematical demonstration that the inverse square law worked. And so that was the proof. But all it was in the end was an abstraction. He didn't say anything about what gravity was. He made no hypothesis about what the cause of gravity was.
Hypothesis.
It was just a mathematical. It was just a mathematical thing. Yes,
and then you got Lesage and his theory and other people like that. So that it did carry on, didn't it?
So in a sense, basically, all we're talking about is Einstein being wrong, as we're saying his mathematical description is wrong. What about his mathematical description?
You can say lots of different things about Einstein. Well, Einstein did a lot of things, so you can pick up on lots of different things that Einstein talks about. So ideally, if you could just pick on one thing and then get the mainstream to agree about that one thing being wrong, then we might be able to get somewhere. But we've all got different opinions on latch onto different things. What Einstein says as being wrong. So Einstein has been very fruitful in what he said. Okay, I think that really ends this session. So thank you, Harry, and everybody else. So hopefully this has been enlightening to everybody that all around the world, if we add this to other sessions which I've dealt with, that trying to debate the issue of whether Einstein's relativity is wrong gets blocked. So I can just finish it now. End of session. Thank you. Goodbye, Carrie. Yes, goodbye. No. Thank you. I'm ending session. Bye-bye. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye, everybody. Hopefully see you next time. Thank you. Bye.